A lot of companies are moving outside of California. When you look at Bakersfield, it's kind of a great place to manufacture and distribute. So there's a lot of reasons, but it's mostly the talent.
You just heard Les Mood, Chief Public Affairs Officer for Sine Watts. Les Mood's background is in renewable energy project design, development, finance, and construction in Central California. For 16 years, his career has been focused on market development for green technology. He has helped some of the earliest and biggest organizations in the industry and helped some small ones get started and find a niche throughout his career. By education and experience, he understands finance and business administration and has found it valuable for marketing early-stage technology companies. He's also the founder of Green Tech Talk Show, launched with support from LinkedIn, as well as an advisor, content creator, and expert in distributed energy and EV charging infrastructure. In this week's episode of the R2 Cents podcast, I sat down with Dave Plivelich and Les Mood with Sine Watts. Sine Watts, to me, was something brand new. I hadn't heard of it till 3 weeks ago, and I read an article in the Bakersfield Californian that I think Troy Burden sent to me, if I'm not mistaken. And I said, well, let's try to get this guy on the podcast and talk about what's new in Bakersfield, what's coming to Bakersfield, this new tech company. Wanted to get some more information on when they would be here, what kind of tech they are developing, what kind of job opportunities this brings to our community. And so that's why we decided to have him on. He's had a successful 16-year career or so in this kind of space. And it was fascinating for me because it was something completely new. I kind of came into it with the ability to ask questions of a 5-year-old because all of that was just something I was not familiar with. And so I hope I was able to extract some information that you folks find useful. Enjoy the show.
Welcome back to the Our 2 Cents podcast, the show where your local professionals sit down with an array of guests to hear their story and impart some wisdom for both business and life-improving skills. This is your place to hear business and community leaders discuss relevant topics that matter to you.
And welcome back to this week's episode of the R2 Cents podcast. My name is Kyle Jones, and I'm here with my co-host for today, Dave Plivelich with the Marcom Group. Before we get into today's guest, I want to encourage our listeners to check out last week's episode where Scott Hansen sat down with President of the Bakersfield Condors, Matt Riley. They also had a previous player and their senior director as well. So without further ado, Les Mood, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for taking the time to come in and speak with us today.
Absolutely. I didn't quite melt on the way here. And it feels good to be in the air conditioning again.
Yeah, which is on right now, but you can hardly tell. So let's kind of start with the basics. What is Sine Watts? What does the company do? How is it started? Just kind of give us the brief background, if you would.
Yeah, so Sine Watts is a power electronics company. Many would be familiar with solar power. Sine Watts has demonstrated with the Department of Energy the solar power part of the technology. And in coming to Bakersfield, we'll be working on that same technology applied inside of electric vehicles. Sine Watts was formed in 2011 as a new type of power electronics, and I can get more into that, but it's basically a more efficient, smaller footprint, more powerful power electronics than what's on the market today.
Okay, so that was kind of your in that space, is something new and innovative within that regard.
Absolutely, yeah. There's been some, technology on the market, mostly power electronics since the 70s, and it's improved over time, but there's really only a handful of ways to do it, and Sine Watts is doing a new, definitely innovative way to do power electronics.
So our listeners kind of explain kind of what they're familiar with compared to what you're doing and how it's changed.
Yeah, sure. So on the solar side, the efficiencies and the demonstrated technology for Sine Watts are an improvement over what's out there today. But the big impact that Sine Watts will have, because of the advantages that it has, which is smaller, more powerful, will actually be inside of an electric vehicle. So for perspective, a solar panel, you can have inverters on the back of them. You can have them done in different ways. Sine Watts is a unique way to do that in itself, but the big advantage to Sine Watts is how powerful it is. So for comparison, the DC fast chargers that power like a Tesla or that power other electric vehicles are sometimes the size of like refrigerators. Those boxes would be entirely eliminated and put inside of an electric car to where they wouldn't be needed anymore outside of the vehicle. They would be inside of the vehicle. So that level of weight and that level of power electronics that would normally be required for a large DC fast charger would be miniaturized and put inside of the car, for example.
Would it change the way it's charged in any way, or would the current infrastructure support whatever it is that you're...
Actually, the infrastructure today is having a hard time scaling electric vehicle charging stations for numerous reasons, and it would change the way the charging is done. It would eliminate the need for DC fast chargers, for example. Some of the other components that are outside of the vehicle would be entirely eliminated and put inside of the vehicle. So the grid itself, the connection point to the grid would remain the same, say AC power, but you would eliminate the hardware in between the vehicle and the grid, which would allow the grid to scale faster for the EV fast charging. Another difference is that...
So you're not restricted to where you're charging at necessarily?
No, you'll still need that amount of power coming in from the grid, but connecting to it won't cost near as much. Those DC fast chargers are budgeted for, at least with the Inflation Reduction Act, or the deployment for that are $250,000 often, sometimes more, for a DC fast charger. So that would be entirely eliminated. But the difficulty really is the uni charging, the one direction of the charging. The vehicles are pulling from the grid and not giving back and not supporting the grid. So what Sine Watts would actually allow for is it's not just miniaturized power electronics, it's also bidirectional. So the power electronics, the vehicle itself can charge from the grid or charge the grid, so it can actually provide the power back. So much like a Tesla Powerwall or a power pack, or these mega packs or these large battery systems that are needed for the grid in order to support renewable energy, the electric car would become that energy storage source for the grid.
Interesting. And so, obviously we can get to the technical aspects of it in a little more detail, but I wanted to kind of focus on the company itself. So we're about 11 years old and moving to Bakersfield. When is the move going to be complete, or what's that looking like?
The move is in process on the equipment and laboratory side. The company has moved its headquarters to California Avenue. We'll be mostly doing work and business here on the research side, hopefully soon, with the local academic institutions. And within a few years, we'll be hopefully demonstrating the technology, powering the grid, and doing other sorts of things. But the move itself will be complete within the next few months.
Okay. And where is this move from?
North Carolina. UNC Charlotte is where the technology demonstrations and research and development have been done previously.
Okay. Now, do you or anyone in the executive management team of this company have any connections to Bakersfield? And if not, why Bakersfield? Which we're glad to have you, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah,
but I'm just curious as to why.
Yeah. So Bakersfield, actually, as you would know, is the energy capital of California. Personally, as an advisor to the company now, as a public affairs officer, I'm from Bakersfield. There's another advisor, Richard Forster, who is from Bakersfield. But Sine Watts was looking to come back to California, having been from Palo Alto to UNC Charlotte, where the research and development was done for the PV, photovoltaics, back to California to work on the vehicle-to-grid technology, which is the primary focus, the next stage of development, where the patents and the technology focus has been for the last few years, as well as the focus for California. So California tends to lead on policy and a lot of tech development, in this case, vehicle-to-grid technology. So Bakersfield, though, is an important energy hub. It's an important region for engineers. There's a lot of room to grow. Manufacturing, for example. A lot of companies are moving outside of California. When you look at Bakersfield, it's kind of a great place to manufacture and distribute. So there's a lot of reasons, but it's mostly the talent.
And so how many employment opportunities will this move bring to Bakersfield? I don't know if you have an exact number, but ballpark figure.
It depends on the stage of development, but on the academic side, the research side, the university side would be, say, dozens of jobs. Internally at the company, in conjunction with that, would be dozens more of jobs, all mostly engineering jobs within the first few years. Ultimately, though, it should lead towards manufacturing jobs, hundreds and maybe thousands of jobs, as well as infrastructure jobs, charging stations, and those sorts of things. But it could create thousands of jobs depending on where they're located, but hopefully they would all be here in Kern County.
And you said your headquarters is on California Avenue? And what cross street? I don't think I've seen the building yet.
You know the two towers?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's where we're at.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So by the Petroleum Club, old Petroleum Club, I should say.
Yeah.
Ish.
A little bit further east, but yeah.
So, okay, you spoke a little bit about what the technology can do in terms of minimizing, I guess, the carbon footprint. Can you give us some more specifics as to how that's done and what that means for someone who's maybe not familiar with that terminology?
Sure. So much like cell phones and computers and most electronics, they've become smaller over time. Cell phone is a great example of the direction that Sine Watts could go. For example, we had, telephone lines, and the grid is similar to, in my view, it's very similar to telephone poles, and telephone lines are similar to the grid. So in a similar way, cell phones are now wireless. Electricity could be wireless as well without poles, not necessarily in the air or through some frequencies, but literally delivered without wires by car or by vehicle or some kind of vessel. So ultimately, that's one of the directions that we would see the technology going in the future, is towards delivering energy remotely or delivering energy in a new way outside of traditional fashions, where the electric vehicle becomes a resource for the grid and not just a draw on the grid.
That I'm going to have some follow-up questions on, because it's above my pay grade. So when you say transfer electricity in a new way, are you saying the vehicle would mobily transfer electricity to another vehicle, or what purpose would it be? I'm having a hard time picking up on that.
Yeah, so electricity generally is done through wires, and there's a fragile side to it. It's an older system that we have today, much like the telephone lines themselves. If there's a storm or something, the lines may go down. Same thing with the grid. So the electric vehicle would become a resource for the grid, and it would store energy for the grid, number one, and it would deliver energy when it's needed. So it would take a lot of the intermittent renewable energy that has to go somewhere when it's produced. The solar energy or the wind energy isn't up, the sun isn't all the time, and the wind isn't blowing all the time. That energy has to go somewhere. So our grid is getting more complex with renewable energy, and it's an outdated wiring system.
Yeah.
So you have an outdated wire grid with, complex renewable generation. You need to store that energy. But you also, in some cases, could deliver energy in new ways where it hasn't been delivered before, to a property, to say where there's no lines. That may be more important in countries like India or Africa, where the phone lines, or in this case, the power lines don't exist. Then wireless,
developed, yeah,
exactly. Then wireless power or wireless phones become more important. That may be more important in other countries, but where we're at now is the fragility of the grid itself, and ways to economically store energy. And what better vehicle than a vehicle itself to do that in a way where the vehicle is already paid for, it's already being utilized for transportation. Now it's providing additional benefits to consumers who use or own them, as well as being a resource for the grid and not just a draw on the grid.
Well, I mean, because the governor just recently, said, hey, we're going to go all electric vehicles by 2030, 2035?
I think.
Yeah.
No manufacturing of gas vehicles after 2035, correct?
Yeah, but then yesterday we're getting warnings. I got the bam, bam, bam on my phone while I'm driving. They shouldn't do that. I was not prepared for that at all. But, hey, watch your power usage and reduce your charging of your electric vehicle if possible. So a lot of that has to do with our infrastructure is simply not ready for this, But what you're saying with this technology, it will give us the possibility to be able to ramp up faster that way because of the reduction.
Right. Yeah. It's going to take a lot of effort to be able to even maintain the grid that we have, including warnings and emergencies, notices like we got to ramp down power, increase our temperature, but that's not sustainable in itself. Yeah. Certainly not sustainable to scale up electric vehicles on today's grid. Yeah. So in order to scale up the electric vehicles, the electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and a grid to facilitate all of the infrastructure that we have today and the infrastructure of tomorrow, the electric vehicle itself has to become part of that infrastructure as the battery. So yes, deploying the charging stations and the infrastructure will be a lot easier when it's built into the car and a lot of the hardware is eliminated, but it'll also be a lot easier to scale up the energy storage needed for a 100% renewable grid, or a grid that's extremely intermittent and localized if you have local power. One of the advantages to this technology will be enabling a localized grid to where transmission lines aren't as necessary and pockets or regions are entirely independent of the grid itself, the larger grid. And so as we try to bring new renewables onto the grid, wind turbines into Tehachapi, or large scale solar projects in the desert, the requirement there is massive transmission lines, and that takes time, that takes resources, that takes material, that takes money. So the more we can localize the grid and make it more resilient on the local side, the more we can enable local generation and more resiliency overall for the grid, which would be the goal for the future, is for it to be more resilient, more clean, and more distributed.
So how far along are you guys in the process? I mean, I see that you got patents filed and all that, has there been testing and this implemented, even in a lab situation? Yeah. To what scale, and when do you think this will be coming to market for all of us to start using?
Yeah, we're at a more exciting stage than it has been for the previous years. Mostly laboratory work has been done. More laboratory work will be done. Sure. Consumers or folks like me like to see things on YouTube and whatnot. We'll be seeing things, cool projects in the next couple of years. But in the laboratory and in the field, Sine Watts demonstrated photovoltaic technology. So on the inverter side, on the back of each panel, Sine Watts has its own way of doing that. That was demonstrated with the Department of Energy, a couple of rounds of funding there at UNC Charlotte, and then University of Alabama in partnership with the utility industry on the East Coast to showcase the photovoltaics. And the goal then was really to reduce the cost of solar, to improve the resiliency of the systems themselves, the longevity, and reduction in material components needed to make the solar hardware. So that has been done, but the more profound impact that could be done on the grid to advancing a renewables grid is more on the energy storage side. And what better vehicle than a vehicle? So the focus hasn't been on, and it could be deploying that solar technology and creating a product, but the focus has been over the last few years in taking that technology and applying it and re-architecting the way electric vehicles are designed on the inside and on the outside. So that work and the patents have all been done. So what will be done in Bakersfield is similar to what was done with the photovoltaics, which is demonstrations in the field to take the technology to a product level and ultimately make the biggest impact that the technology can through vehicles.
So who is your consumer, your client? Are you going to sell to current electric vehicle manufacturers, or is it something where it's going to take a new type of electric vehicle to support this technology, or how does that look?
So the importance of the demonstration is to show the industry, the world, and other manufacturers how the technology works and why they should use it. So ultimately, the end user would be the automotive industry. Oftentimes, so manufacturers will make their own vehicle or they'll make their own products to bring it to market. That may be the case with Sine Watts. Sine Watts may make its own and may sell it to other manufacturers. It depends on the partnerships that develop. But ultimately, the goal would be for all electric vehicles to operate much more efficiently and with much less hardware like Sine Watts could provide. So ultimately, Sine Watts will provide this technology to other companies.
So even though we're 11 years old now, it sounds like this is still in its infancy. Mm-hmm. Can you kind of give us I don't know if you thought about it in this way, analogy-wise, but can you kind of give us an idea of where we're at in the infancy or the buildup of this technology? I'm just going to throw this out of the top of my head. Is it like how cell phones were in, the mid 90s, where we had, a big old pack that was you put on your floorboard and plugged into a cigarette lighter. And then, fast forward to 2007, and now you have an iPhone. So that's 12 years. Can you give us any type of analogy of where we're at and what it kind of looks like?
Yeah, on a bigger, broader scale, with the development of the grid itself, AC power with Tesla, the grid itself hasn't changed much since then. We've gotten smarter in how we manage the grid, or, we're integrating computers in the management of the grid, but the grid itself hasn't been re-architected since Nikola Tesla. This technology is a new way of doing AC electricity. It's called series AC. So in my view, on a broader scale, there's been nothing more significant since Nikola Tesla with the way that the electricity works and the way that the power electronics work. There's 4 ways to do power electronics, and Sine Watts is the 4th way. It's the most complicated way, and it hasn't been done before. So in the power electronics world, what has already been demonstrated with the technology is monumental in terms of the theory behind energy, as well as the impact that it would have on the miniaturization of electronics themselves. If we could compare it to another industry or cell phones, it would probably be like what we first experienced, where we got off the cords and we had those little brick phones in our house. That's kind of where we are with EVs today. We're still held down and tied down by the little base inside of our house. Yes, we've got
the charging station at Madonna Inn on.
We're stuck at this charging station and it doesn't work. It's like, got an operating functionality of like, 25% or 75%. So we're kind of like there, I would think. We're stuck in the house. We're still using a phone, but it's wireless in our own home. And we're not having to like wrap around our fingers with this cord. So that's where we're at with cars today, in my view. But where cars will be is when they're actually not tied down by a charging station at your home, not tied down by a charging station that costs $250,000, not tied down still by the old infrastructure, but actually the new infrastructure. The cell phone industry completely transformed the telephone industry. I think the same thing will be the case with Sine Watts when charging infrastructure is no longer requiring all of these different hardware, all of these different components that have limited lifespans, massive amount of expense and mining and material. So Sine Watts will be disruptive, but as far as where we're at, we're a lot closer to implementing the transformative type of technology that Sine Watts can provide within a few years. We'll see more happen, in my view, in the next 5 years than we've seen happen, in the previous 10 as far as EVs go.
The need is growing. Can you guys speed this thing up a little bit? And clearly it's definitely growing. I mean, it is kind of perfect timing for what you guys are doing. I mean, it's a good thing that you did start 11 years ago, and because the need of it is just increased tenfold over the past few years even. So
yeah, the more I hear about it, it seems more revolutionary. I mean, I hate to throw that word around as some, but
the capital EV, right?
Yeah. There you go. Hey, you guys have that trademarked?
Nah, we throw all these trademarks out there and they get picked up by other companies.
Oh, okay.
We have to hurry up and trademark them. Every time we go somewhere and talk about it, we got to trademark the things we talk about.
We got a week before this airs, so if that one's not done,
that one.
I'm joking.
Ones we have used though are batteries on wheels and power plants on wheels, and other companies. We won't name names. They've kind of big companies
hijack
use those words too. But I mean, the reason we call Sine Watts power plants on wheels, or we referred to it first as batteries on wheels, is Ford came out with the Ford Lightning, which you can connect to your home through extra hardware, inverters and whatnot. And as Ford describes it, it takes a lot of money to buy that extra hardware, and it requires subsidies in order to really create a marketplace to be able to tap into your truck or any vehicle
feasible,
for that case.
Right.
So people were like, oh my God, Ford beat you guys to it, Les and Shibo, Dr. Baumick. And it's like, well, actually there's a big difference. It's more like Sine Watts is a power plant on wheels. It's not a battery on wheels. Everything is built in. It's bidirectional, can actually power things at a high power, a high capacity. So we did that, and then other people started using the power plant on wheels. We're like, they just don't get it. They don't get it.
Kind of a tangent, but you may not know the answer to this a little bit. But do you currently know the data or the specifics on how much strain charging of electric vehicles in California are to the grid at this point?
That's a good question. I don't. That would be a Dr. Baumick question.
Yeah.
What I can say, though, is that today's electric car, if we want it to do what Sine Watts can do bidirectionally inside of the car, or just to charge and then to discharge the car, the part of the game changer that Sine Watts will provide is the energy going in through a DC fast charger. You're losing about 10 to 15% of the energy, and then inside of the car itself, the battery management system, which Sine Watts would replace, along with all of the other power electronics, the battery management system is another 10, 15% loss. It's all lost in heat. And then if you want to take that energy and put it back into the grid to use the car as a vessel for the grid or part of the grid, then you lose another 10 to 15% going back through the charger the other direction. So you're losing at least 30% of the energy going in and out of the car if you want to use it for the grid. With Sine Watts, it's 98% or higher efficiency both directions, so you lose 3 or 4% energy going in or out instead of 30 or 40%.
So that's what you're trying to capture, that percentage, basically.
A massive increase in the efficiency of the energy going in and out and within the vehicle itself to be a lot more efficient. So in addition to not needing all of the hardware outside of the vehicle, the DC fast charger and all of the costs and the material inside of it, as well as the material necessary on the power electronic side for the vehicle itself. So it's a dramatic reduction in waste of material content, but of also the electricity going in and out. And because of the way the grid works, when you have this large wind farm or solar farm or nuclear plant hundreds of miles away, the grid, it loses energy when it's hot, or when the energy is transmitting across those power lines, you're losing energy too. You might lose 20-30% of that energy. So by the time it comes to the vehicle, you've already lost energy, and then you're losing even more. So we could dramatically reduce the amount of renewable energy systems that would be needed for charging electric vehicles if we produce that power locally and it goes directly into the cars using Sine Watts. And we can eliminate upwards to, say, 50% of the renewable generation needed for electric vehicle transportation as it is today.
Based on old technology.
Based on today's
Angel's
technology.
envy. When you think of whiskey and angel's envy, what goes away, that's what they're trying to capture there.
Yeah.
I get it. That makes sense. So
So there's a lot of loss in today's infrastructure. It's not scalable, and it's not sustainable, and it's going to be super expensive.
So is it safe to say that electric vehicles now are wasteful? I mean, I know we look at them as clean, and
They are an improvement, so to speak, on today's vehicles in terms of the carbon footprint that they have. They're not scalable. If we continue in the direction that we are, they could become problematic for the grid. We have to upgrade the grid just because of electric vehicles, in addition to the challenges we already have with society. So, but I do think, I mean, obviously they're an improvement on, they're faster, they're cleaner, they're quieter, but they're not really as practical. So that's one of the challenges that we have to overcome, as well as the practicality, the carbon footprint, and the scalability. And ideally, we would want electric vehicles to not just replace today's transportation system, but to give back in other ways and to improve society in other ways as well.
And you might have already said this, but in our conversation, but what does the grid of the future look like?
So the grid of the future will never break down. It would be local. So the grid of the future would be distributed. So it wouldn't.
So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but so can I keep saying local? So Bakersfield will have a grid, Tehachapi will have a grid, or I don't know this, or LA will have a grid. What do you mean by that?
That is feasible for entire cities to have their own grid. Over time, the logistics of doing that, that could be a political issue or whatever. But the grid itself, the energy generation, it will be consumed where it's generated, and the entire grid will be produced locally and used locally. There may be energy transmitted across long distances and on a large scale, but for the most part, the grid of the future the energy itself will be used as close to the source that it's produced. That will enable, and it will be distributed, so it won't be one large or a handful of large power plants. You'll have hundreds or thousands of miniaturized power plants all over a city. And so that city has enough power itself to isolate from the main grid if it were necessary. And in the case of power outages, natural disasters, that will be possible.
So it's still part of the main grid. Yeah. It's a backup.
Yeah. It's part of it. It should prevent power outages. It should also prevail in power outages as well. And so the grid of the future would be more resilient in that way and more adaptable. But also it would be clean. It would be feasible to do 100% clean energy if you have a large amount of energy storage, which is where the electric vehicle comes in. And so being distributed and clean and local, this means that businesses and people are going to own the power generation systems, they're going to own the energy storage systems, and the grid may change and the business models may change over time. I don't want to predict what that will look like. We're just going to provide the technology, but that may mean that the utility models change slightly or they change dramatically. It depends on, what the industry wants to do.
And the economics of this, is it to where it's running on a presumption that everyone is driving an electric vehicle and gas combustion is just no longer part of?
There would be a critical mass in terms of enough vehicles with the Sine Watts technology to be able to power an entire region as the region's source of battery. That'll take time, but actually the number of electric vehicles that are going on the road today or that are projected to go onto the road by 2035 would be far more than enough vehicles to power the whole grid on an energy storage basis. Then you still need the generation. That scaling up of generation would need to be in conjunction. So renewable energy systems on people's rooftops or businesses, all of that would naturally be happening on its own. But Sine Watts should be able to play a role in mitigating power outages within, say 5 to 10 years once the products are out there. But the grid being entirely resilient and 100% renewable, I think is probably definitely going to take to 2035, 2045, or so. Time goes by pretty quickly, but
yeah, the amount of change you're talking about, that, I mean, no one can do that overnight. I mean, that's a whole system and, economy of scale that has to be
rebuilt to the world's most complex machine. The grid is monumental, and what's been done already is pretty monumental.
Yeah. So before we let you go here, we always in some rapid fire questions. Got to get you know the guests a little more personally. But so it's interesting. You guys are obviously a tech company, right? I mean, and there are others in Bakersfield now that I guess have been here. Last 3 or 4 or 5 years, we've seen an influx of technology companies. To me, what's interesting is that we are the ag capital of California, the energy capital of California, with not only solar and wind, but also fossil fuels. And so you have this like eclectic, blend of industries that are kind of all coming together in one community. Do you guys talk about that, or is that something that you see as a positive for our community, or is it something that other older technologies may be, threatened by you guys? Or do you see it more of a cohesive?
That's why we chose Bakersfield, the company, all of the advisors, and is that innovative business environment that Bakersfield is known for, Kern County. As they say at KEDC, Kern Economic Development Corporation, it's where business is boundless. I think that's really true. To see every single industry, space, agriculture, oil and gas, renewable deployment, and distribution now is picking up dramatically as well. You see all of those industries, and that takes a lot of skills, that takes a lot of talent, that takes a lot of grit, that takes a lot of hard work. So all of that skill set, all of that talent is here. So yeah, we do internally at Sine Watts talk about, and we're very aware of the diversity in terms of the economic wealth and prosperity that Kern County has, but in terms of ideas and mindset as well.
When you said you're from Bakersfield, correct?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you were one of the guys in that room pitching our wonderful city and county to get here.
Absolutely. I mean, I saw it before anyone, and I pitched it, and I'm, thankful to have been able to do so. Bakersfield is where Sine Watts is coming, but the intention was to come to California, and I pitched Bakersfield mostly because we wanted to partner with the university and work with academic institutions, and to do it in a region where we could accomplish all of the phases for Sine Watts, if possible, in one region. And Bakersfield is that region, but the opportunity is significant, but also, there's tremendous desire to see Bakersfield continue to advance and innovate, not just within Kern County, but outside of Kern County too. So there's a lot of respect, I think, for Kern County, for those who in the state are who are aware of the industries that we have here that are doing business with Bakersfield and Kern County. But I think there's not maybe as much knowledge about Bakersfield and Kern County internationally, or maybe in the U.S. I think maybe more so in California. But we did a lot of research, and I pitched it, but it was kind of a no-brainer, to be honest. Yeah.
Well, something you just said, the respect, I think in the business community, I think you're right. I think there is a lot of respect for Kern County and Bakersfield. Now, if we could just transfer that to the political level of the state, because it seems like the state of California kind of looks at Kern County and Bakersfield as like a almost an inconvenience. But it's like, I don't know if you recently saw Vince Fong's speech on the congressional floor. Have you seen that? You gotta search it up on his Instagram account, but he basically said, well, here's what the Valley does for this state and for the country and for the world. And it was pretty cool to hear someone kind of stand up and say that.
Check that out.
Yeah. Okay. So Dave, want to take the first one?
Sure. Let's see here. What is a quote that you live by?
Build it and they will come, or he will come, the Field of Dreams.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Love that movie. What book do we have to read and why?
The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell, I think is a really good one. I think it helps you understand the different personalities that make things happen. Big things, bad things, pandemics, or crime waves or new sneakers being popular across the country or something like that. I think understanding how products and people, social pandemics happen, I think is important. And that's why I love that book.
Yeah, great book.
Dave, you take the last one.
All right. If you could be remembered for one thing, what would it be?
It would be for facilitating collaboration. In general, I think online is a huge opportunity, and I'm involved in a lot of online networking and business development, as well as content creation and so forth, kind of like you guys. And so for me, I would just like to be remembered as facilitating that for other people, and not just what I do or what I achieve personally in my career, but being helpful to other people so that they can advance their careers, so that they can do whatever it is they want to do.
I like that.
Me too.
I can't remember what professor it was. I wish I could remember his name in law school now. But anyway, he said that he said you always have to leave something for the next guy. Yeah. And he was kind of talking about that from a bit, as you transition from like academics and going to law school, learning about laws and theories, and going into the the real world and working, whether it be for a firm or those of us like myself who started their own business and practice. That was something always kind of stuck with me. Is like, it's okay to be hungry. It's okay to go out and work hard, but you always got to leave something for the next guy. And not, it was another way of saying don't be greedy and, stuff we all kind of hear and know about. But to me, that kind of put things in perspective. And I try to use that philosophy when I'm doing my business.
Make a difference, man. It's all about making a difference.
It's another way of saying that too. Exactly.
Yeah.
Leave something for the next guy, or give him a hand up. Take a little time.
Yeah.
It doesn't hurt.
It's better for everyone, right?
Yeah.
Well, we sure appreciate your time coming in. We're excited to see what your company is bringing to Bakersfield, what it's going to bring, what the future looks like, and
it's good to know we got a great ambassador out there for
pitching.
City.
Yeah,
well, it's wonderful to be here in Bakersfield, and I'm very thankful Sine Watts chose Bakersfield myself. Anyone interested in reaching out and contacting you, learning more about you? I don't know if you guys are hiring in the future. Where's the best place to kind of communicate with you? So Sine Watts is on LinkedIn mostly for social media, sinewatts.com. Personally, I'm, mostly on LinkedIn as well, especially professionally. So you can find me, Les Mood, on Sine Watts, or on LinkedIn, or Sine Watts on LinkedIn. That's the best way. Sine Watts will be more than likely hiring on an academic level and an engineering basis, and maybe a management consulting basis over the next, say, 6 to 12 months would be my estimate. Of course, there's no job postings or not. Subject to change. Yeah, right. Yeah, definitely anybody in Kern County that's in the engineering or the electricity or construction or building business, there'll be some exciting collaborations that may be possible, demonstrating electric vehicles powering buildings or other electric vehicles and so forth, pumps, ag pumps, maybe even oil pumps. So there's a lot of collaboration. So engineering collaborations would be interesting. But anybody that wants to reach out, I'll be on LinkedIn. All right, appreciate it. Very good. Thanks again for coming in. Nice meeting you.
This show has been brought to you by the Law Office of Kyle Jones, Troy Burton with the Lynn Company, CPA John Duffield, Scott Hansen Real Estate Lender, broker and investor, Dave Plivelich, President and CEO of the Marcom Group and MarcomBranding.com, and Amanda DiGiacomo, President of Atlas Financial Solutions. You've been listening to the Our 2 Cents podcast. Check out the show notes for links and more information about the show. Also visit our website at our2centspodcast.com or catch us on Instagram at Our 2 Cents Podcasts. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and share with others.